Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. It is truly a privilege to be sitting among such three talented writers. And I have a lot of tough and quirky questions for them. So do please also think up of your some questions of your own and join in the conversation. That's how we plan to keep it. So yeah, crime in the city. And cities are intrinsic to the books you have written. And I would like to invite each one of you to talk about why a city is important to the setting of a book. And shall we begin with Sanjay maybe?
I think I would also like to reference the fact that crime itself has changed. I'm not a crime writer per se, but in my last two novels, crime has played a significant role. My first memory of crime was in my teens when I woke up one night and I could hear the sound of somebody walking in the backyard. And when I looked out, it was a sight of a thief, a criminal. He was bare-bodied, other than a pair of shorts, and he had applied oil on his body so that if he was caught, he couldn't be held. And he had this straggly hair, and I made some noise. I must have made some noise because he just ran, scaled the wall, and jumped. And for me, that was the abiding image of a criminal, which is, a puttukadai fellow, or, a guy who runs a kirana shop. He's a lone ranger. He's got his own one-person operation going. And then over a period of time, I realized in my years in Bombay, with my exposure to so-called white-collar crime, just like you had blue-collar crime, you had white-collar crime. And completely different idea of what crime is all about. And then when I was there in Bombay in those years, in the 80s and 90s, you had this whole Bombay riots that took place, you had the bomb blasts that took place, and you had this whole encounter phenomenon which took place, where cops were authorized to execute so-called criminals without due process of law. So for me, very briefly, and I'll touch upon this later, it did strike to me that the question that it was raising really is what is a crime and who is a criminal, given the context of this whole encounter phenomenon. And for me, this whole thing came full circle when my recent book, where you see a criminal, so what you call a criminal mastermind. In this case, he's just a sutradhar who sets things in motion, but is not held to account. Is not liable for the consequences. So again, what I try to raise in these books is that crime happens and so much happens, but really what is a crime, who is a criminal, who gets punished? I mean, these are the kind of concerns, and these came up in Bombay, and the last novel is in Chennai. And I think cities are breeding grounds for real events which breed these kind of stories. My experience is Bombay and Chennai.
Thank you. Thank you. Zach, would you like to share your thoughts? I mean, Sanjay said something very interesting. I mean, at least my takeaway is that the nature of the crime almost varies with the city, at least his experiences. How does that reflect, considering your crimes set in India and internationally?
Yeah, so I guess we'll talk about like the Bangalore specific things a little bit later. But as a general remark, the thing is that like what kind of novel you set in what kind of city is very specific, and it's like it can only be set in that city. If, for example, like I remember talking to a translator friend. I'm from Sweden originally. So Swedish crime fiction, Nordic noir is a huge industry. So one translator was translating into French said that there was some, it was a little bit difficult to translate a particular book into French because in the book there's a character who hates somebody and goes and urinates in the mail slot on the door. Now in those countries there's a slot in the door where the postman puts the mail, and so in Sweden, I don't know if it's very common, but in Sweden apparently people do urinate through these things, and the urine comes into the victim's house. In France, it's a bit more like India. The post boxes are in the lobby of the building and a little bit high up. And so when this translator was trying to translate this very culture-specific thing, it was like, I mean, how do you explain that? No? Like in France, you would need kind of a step ladder with you. You would have to climb up to urinate into that post box and think. So what I mean by this is that, like, you know, the particular culture is reflected in the writing, and it's not like immediately, you can't have like a generic city, like a crime in Stockholm, a crime in Paris, a crime in Bangalore will have to be different because there are various cultural differences, how you know, deal with things. So to me, the beauty of the crime novel is often more than the plot, is about like where it is set, the location, if it is Bombay, if it is wherever. The crime novel somehow can, you know, it can work as a guide to that particular place. So like when I travel, like when I went to China, I picked up a few Chinese crime novels just to, you know, read how, like, I mean, suppose I want to urinate in a Chinese post box. Do I need to bring a step ladder from India, or, you know, how does it work there? So that way, I really like the kind of crime novels that have that sort of, preserves the sort of culture of the place and works as a kind of, so you have to think, okay, so in that country they do like this. In my country, they do like this. So it opens up a different culture for you, a different city. And even like within India, you know, a crime novel in Bangalore versus a crime novel in Mumbai will have to be different. It cannot be exactly the same, even, you know, even if it's the same country. So that is like, I think like that is really the
I think
beauty
if
of
you
the
could
thing.
adapt Chinese crime in India, we could just call it death by Manjuri, because that's what we call Manchurian in India.
In the
And
Gobi Desert.
Manchuri, Manjuran. I've also heard of Manoranjan, but the latest I saw was a shop near my house. It had Manju Rehan. Gobi Manju Rehan. It sounded more like a love jihad association of Manju and Rehan. So yeah, in fact, picking from that, um, I'm a humor writer. I don't usually write crime, but the book I wrote this year, The Perfect Riddance, has a bit of crime, and I've tried to use a principle of contrast. So the crime is set in a city which is very placid, very quiet, green, lush, pine tree lined roads, and that's my memory of Dehradun, where I would visit Mussoorie a lot when I was growing up, and the crime is there. But when my protagonist comes to Mumbai, which is really the maximum city, yours and Suketu Mehta's, and where all the nefarious stuff happens, that is where she actually discovers herself. That is where she becomes the person she's meant to be. So I've tried to use the contrast, perhaps because I'm very individualistic in that sense that there has to be a passion and a determination, some kind of grit that the lead character shows, and despite the city, you know, does something, or the city, despite being so calm and quiet, has crime happening in it. In my previous book, Band Baja Boys, which is now a web series called Manford Ganj, there are adorable criminals. These are these small town guys, the one-sided love affairs, the eve teasing. And a concept I've explored there is and since it's set in my hometown of Allahabad, there is a very Allahabadi concept called Bakaiti. Bakat is a spin-off on Dakat, which means bandit. And Bakat is that adorable person who butts his nose into the street fights or gets into an argument, offers his or her opinion everywhere. And as they say, he wears his heart on his sleeve. And I turn it around and say he wears his sleeve on his heart because the decisions are taken in the heart, and out of that emerges one fist to punch the other guy. And after he's punched and had a fight, the next day he says, "Oh, don't mind, it was just all in jest, we can be friends now." So that adorable, cute, whatever aspect of crime is what I've explored in Band Baja Boys. So those are the three cities I've worked with.
Nice, nice. And you know, on that, I sort of want to, you know, go further into something you're saying and then take it to the others as well, which is that it's in your books, who is seeing the city? Is it you, the writer? Is it something that is the city something that we're introduced to through the eyes of the characters? How do you typically explore the city?
It's a very good question, Krishna, because who is defining not just the character but the city? It has to be a bit of the author every time. And as long as the author is very conscious and cognizant of who is influencing. For instance, when it comes to crime, there are two very strong views. One is the very individualistic view that a person who is the perpetrator, it's a choice for him or her. The act that he or she commits is a responsibility, and consequently there is a punishment attached to it. And then there is this whole collectivistic view that not really a choice, the person was a victim of circumstance, the person was vulnerable, was driven to it, and finally you shouldn't punish but give more opportunity for that person to. So yes, we should be very conscious on what lens we are using to define the city and the character. Of course, very fond memories of Dehradun, the Maggie being cooked, the crush of pine needles under your feet, or the jams and preserves of Char Dukan of Masuri. I mean, they all will infiltrate the novel. But when it comes to crime, it has to be a very conscious decision on where you are putting the locus of control.
That's very interesting. What about you, Sanjay? Who sees the city?
I think as far as my books are concerned, it's not just describing the city. I mean, you can describe the city, and perhaps each author has a different way of looking at the city. But I think it's more a question of the characters that the city creates, and what is it that the characters do that defines the city perhaps much better than merely describing what the city is all about. And if you take the third novel of mine, The Third Squad, you have a policeman, Ranveer Pratap, who assembles a squad of Aspies, people who have Asperger's, and it's an encounter squad. So somebody like him in a city like Bombay, where you need encounters to happen, he assembles people who are supposed to be less empathetic by definition, the so-called loose definition of Asperger's. And he does something as breathtaking as that. You have a character called Tiwari who is in charge of what is called a Khabari squad. The Khabari squad consists of informers. So he believes that encounters are superfluous. If you have good information, you don't need encounters. But the ways and means of getting that information, how Tiwari operates, what Tiwari is quintessentially Bombay. He's a shopkeeper, he's a tradesman. It's information that he's trading. So the nature of the city shows up in how Tiwari behaves. You have another character who is a counselor. He's a psychiatrist by training. He also runs a pawn site on the side, which pays for something called Rahat, which takes care not so much the children who suffer from autism, but the parents, because the parents need relief from taking care of the children. So a city is as much about what the characters it creates and what those characters do, as an example in The Third Squad. In the recent book, A Tamil Month, you have these 4 boys who are victims. They're called VIPs. Now, VIP in Tamil stands for Vela Illada Pattadhari, which is unemployed graduates. Now, they are recruited by a political party, by the Sutradhar, to foment trouble. And they become victims in the entire process. But you have there a Tamil Brahmin boy who he renounces his Brahmanism, who wants the Adi Dravidas to rise. That is his philosophy. You have a convert Christian called Anthony, who's called Antony. And you have a Gounder boy, the book is about the caste, Gounder caste. And he becomes a victim as well. And you have a guy who doesn't know what his religion is, what his caste is. It's rumored that he is a Muslim and how he behaves. And the way these 4 boys behave, the kind of language that they use, the kind of things that they do, is I think pretty much defined by what, for me, Chennai quintessentially is, which is beyond your idli vada, beyond your tambram stuff, which we all hear endlessly. The Ramamurthis, the Venkatramans, the Subramaniams. That is 8-9% of the population. But you get to know the streets of what the city is, what happens in the street, how they talk, how they behave. And I think crime happens incidentally, but the city shows up. In all this, the city shows up.
That's fascinating. Zach, in your books, whose eyes do we see the city through?
Largely, I agree with Sanjay, what he's saying. But see, in my case, like I'm part-time working as a travel writer and part-time as a crime writer. So as a travel writer, my job is, of course, I don't have a job now thanks to COVID, and there's no travel and there's no writing. So I'm maybe more of a crime writer today. But like in the travel writing job, what you do is you basically explore cities and you kind of open them up to the readers of the magazine or the newspaper where you're working. And so I enjoy doing that. I mean, it's a really fun job, and I enjoy exploring Bangalore and, you know, finding out interesting things about Bangalore, like unusual things, and discovering things in my own neighborhood or wherever in the city, and everywhere in Karnataka, in fact. I'm a very strong Karnataka supporter. But in the novels, it's a little bit different because it's not like my city I'm talking about, but I'm talking about a city from the point of view of the person in the book. So obviously, it's not like how I experience the city. So like when I'm like, I cannot go into Koshi's and all the waiters are, the usual table. I don't even have to order. They bring me UB and club sandwich because they know that I always order it. Whereas when the character in my novel steps into Koshi's, it's like a strange world. You know, it's like different because he comes from a different class. Actually, the character, the main protagonist in the novel is he's not a foreigner, he's a local person, but from a very low class, like an orphan who has grown up in the streets. So for him, experiencing Koshi's, just as an example, it's like a very different thing from when I go to Koshi's. So I try to kind of think myself into his shoes and see like, how will a place like this, or in another book, he's flying from Bangalore airport for the first time in his life. And he's like 30 years old or something, and he's never been on a plane before. So going to Bangalore airport, like most of you probably go there daily and you know exactly where everything is. For him, it's like a strange, bewildering planet because for his first time in his life, he's setting foot in a place. So the challenge for me as a fiction writer is to think like, okay, how will another person experience this? And I think that is also like a really good thing that, I mean, what we should all do once in a while is that we should not think like, how is our comfortable city? How is that city for other people? You know, like somebody who is not as privileged as us, what will they make out of it? What will be their challenges? You know? And that, I think that's sort of, I think I'm talking about a kind of particular intellectual empathy, which is something that one should try to develop so that one can see that as a society, we are not just like me, or we're not just like you, all of us, but we are like many different kinds. And some of us have different needs, different perspectives. And that I think like is something that we as writers can kind of bring out, because obviously the person I'm writing about, he would never read my books because he's not that kind of person. But he'll see it. I mean, there's going to be a Kannada film version. He would see that film, you know, when it comes, because he's into going to movies and things. But he would not read the book. So it's so the book is more like for the people who read books, and it'll open their eyes to, oh, okay, you know, there's different ways of seeing the same thing. We look at the same thing. It's like what Ramakrishna said, no, about the elephant. A couple of blind men, one is touching the trunk and says, oh, it's like, you know, whatever. Other is touching the tree. It's like, oh, I mean, the leg, it's like a tree in the forest. Other is touching the, I don't know, some other body part, and it sort of, so like, it's about interpretation.
You know, that's very interesting, Zach. And actually, I'm going to sort of use that. I think that's a very important point, that a city can be what it is to different people who experience the city. But I'm just going to put all three of you on the spot here a little bit and say, if you were to think of your city as a living character, which it becomes by virtue of your writing, what is sort of the human characteristic you would associate, say, Zach, with Bangalore? I mean, what is Bangalore to you? Kind city, rich city, rude city? I don't know what. Just what is it to you?
Irritable bowel syndrome.
Okay, we're not letting him away without explaining that, please.
Well, city is a bit like a gastric system, no? It's always constipated a little bit. Sometimes it's kind of loose flowing, and sometimes you burps, and sometimes there's like these other sounds. Like I'm not gonna, like, in case anybody of you are going out for dinner afterwards, I'm not gonna exactly describe, but if you can imagine a little bit of mixture of farts, burps, and these kind of things. Cities are very much like that. And I'm saying that because part of my life I spend in the jungle. And jungle is like, it's like oxygen everywhere. It smells, it's green, it smells green, and like it's fresh. City is the opposite. City is a bit like, colon cancer.
Oh, Zach, I still have
You
a
got it,
1 hour
got it.
ride back home. Good, this is going to be on my mind. But yeah, please.
Yeah. You speak to your therapist later, or you call me if you need therapy. I'll sort it out. Okay?
Done.
Yeah.
Done. Thank you. Sanjay, Bangalore, Bombay, Chennai.
You'll have to
what
permit
would
me,
you-
I'll just read it, just a paragraph, okay?
Okay.
But it addresses the question, hence I take the liberty. I was happy I was heading back to Mumbai. I missed the carefree air of modern Mumbaikars, their half-baked expressions, their brusqueness, their khali-pilli fights, and the temporary truce they called Jane De. In Chennai, I had been waylaid by Parkalam, a non-committal let us see that had me climbing walls. The city practiced a tyrannical yes-no nod that was hard to divine. I had slowed down to keep pace with Chennai's thoughtful demands on my time. My time stood apart, it borrowed from the city I was in, to answer your question. In Mumbai, time was a bachelor. In Chennai, a widower. And in Delhi, it was forever a prickly adolescent.
That's a very powerful metaphor. And what you were saying kind of reminds me that, I don't know, I think Bangaloreans here would say we're like, I think Salpa Adjustmadi is now on t-shirts also. So that's pretty much who we are. But Rachna, I mean, you grew up in the cities that you wrote about, and if they were humans, what would you call them? How would you
So I'll go with the body part analogy, but it will be far more palatable. I think the city of my birth and where I grew up, Allahabad, would be a heart. Would be a heart. A heart with 2 feet probably, because people are pretty emotional, and most of the decisions, as I said, and I talked about the concept of Baketi just now. Most of the decisions are taken from the heart, and consequences are not thought of. Consequences are like cows chew on the cud later. People come back to it with broken bones and black eyes, and after all, the damage has been done, and buses have been set on fire, and the elopement is over, and the girl now says, "I want to go back home." That is when the mind comes into play. So it's all in all a heart on 2 feet, I would say.
Those are very interesting. I just want to invite our audience to jump in here. I mean, if you've been to these cities, if you've lived in these cities, Chennai, Mumbai, Bangalore, Allahabad, do you have any words for how you describe them? If they were people, what sort of people would they be? I mean, like Bangalore, we're all here, right? What sort of a person is Bangalore? Bangalore's cool. Is it okay? Cool
Cosmopolitan,
hipster.
yeah.
Cool hipster kind of person.
I think a man with a lot of holes, representing the potholes, and they'll just suck you in. The MO will be that we suck you in, and that's how you die.
I think for me, Bangalore is a sweet anomaly called sweet sambar.
Yes, you're so right.
Only someone who's lived in Chennai for years
Yes.
can say that.
I totally get that, yes.
Okay, I'll add one more to what you said. 99 variety masala dosa.
Oh, yes.
Valid. No, but having said that, sweet sambar can give you irritable bowels at times. So, it kind of all it tallies together. And if you're riding back over potholes home, you're like, when do I get home and visit the washroom? Thanks.
At one
Sorry
point,
for the
we'll have to
irritation.
deconstruct this conversation and figure out what we said right now in the bar.
Any thoughts on Bangalore? No. But no, it's I think it's just wonderful how the city comes alive as a character in each of your works. Um, and I just want to take that process a little further to talk about the human characters you construct. How do you get at that? What is it that drives you? And here we're talking about sometimes some very specific characters who have a criminal mind. Whether it is because of circumstances, as you said, or because of their individual nature. So, how do you approach the criminal mind? Since we write about crime, and I know you have a background in psychology. So, do you want to please start with?
Yeah, I've studied psychology and I love the subject so much, so it creeps into my writing often. So I'd like to talk about the character of Anjali Sikand. She's in this book that I wrote this year, The Perfect Riddance. So Anjali Sikand, and since, as we shared, it's an adaptation of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, she's the evil mother, and she gets the girlfriend of the sun banished from Dehradun. Now, Anjali Sikand, according to me, is, really a product of a cultural dysfunction. We believe that it demonizes certain groups of people, certain groups based on class or caste are inferior to others. In fact, I was reading that the Huns, that brutal tribe, thought that anybody who's not a Hun was subhuman. And in fact, a lot of Chinese and Japanese also thought that the Japanese thought that the Chinese and the Koreans were subhuman for a long time. And in India, closer to home, we do demonize certain groups of people based on a lot of factors, and caste and status is what I cover. So she really is a product of that cultural dysfunction. And to make it worse, she's married to a man who's incapable of love and affection. So what she does is she creates a perfect little man in her son Garv. And this son is probably the reparative fantasy of the perfect man that she's always sought, but never found. So what happens then? Garv has this Peter Pan syndrome, and there's a book called Peter Pan Syndrome, Why Some Men Never Grow Up. So he's there as in a codependent relationship with his mother. He's there for her needs. She's there for his needs. And in fact, there's another book by Kenneth Adams. It's called When Men Get Married to Their Moms. And there is a syndrome, the equivalent of the Oedipal complex called as the Jocasta complex. And through which I try to explain how Anjali has this all-consuming need to have Garv all to herself. And because she has that need, she cannot bear to see another woman enter the picture and share. And consequently, Garv, with this upbringing, is become a guy who has these occasional sporadic bursts of independence where he goes on, gets into relationships. But when the chips are down, he's back to mommy.
So I'm curious, were you able to construct these characters? I mean, were they like their complexes, their psyches all pre-constructed because of your understanding of these theories, or did you just get into them and then realize there was a correlation?
I think there's enough intuitive wisdom also collectively. There are a lot of women who talked about these complexes without these labels, but I've heard of this phenomenon. So it could be both ways. I can have labels for them because I've studied, but then. So she is now blurring certain boundaries with the sun. So I touch upon, and really no pun intended, some covert incest. Then the other boundary she blurs is what is legal and right and what is completely illegal and criminal, to get rid of Ketki, the girl he's in love with. So that's how I put together Anjali Sikand's psyche.
That's what fascinating. How about you, Sanjay? How do you?
I think at one level in my books, they are very normal people. She's mentioned the laundry list of syndromes, but they are day-to-day normal people, and they do certain things, and it's not very hard to understand that at least in the context of what happens, why they do those things, without getting into a judgmental position. I mean, you could as a reader stand in judgment, but in the context of the novel, in the context of the narrative, they're normal people doing normal things which you would expect them to do. That's the way the characters move. But there is, of course, the principal protagonist in the third squad who's an Aspi. And I had to research Asperger's purely because I didn't want to put a foot wrong. But I was a little wary of what they call the rest of humanity, which is neurotypicals, and Asperger's, as if they can be put into buckets. Now, autism is a broad spectrum. You have high functioning, you have low functioning. So I chose somebody who could live an independent life, but who has certain aspects of autism, purely because I wanted to show up the city. The Bombay that I loved and respected, the Bombay that has this work culture, the Bombay that has what I call a collective consciousness, which is something that you realize when you step off the station or you step off the airport, that the city has something. Principally, the city knows how to endure it. There's a lot of hardships thrown at it. The city endures, life goes on, they're there in the office, house is flooded, they're there in office. All that is wonderful. But in this whole period of these encounters, I think the city lost its collective conscience. And I wanted an Aspi who's supposed to be less empathetic, who's not supposed to otherwise figure out all these things, to show up the entire phenomenon, because he starts having doubts about what he's doing, which is killing people. He's an encounter killer. So he starts having doubts. And, Aspis in that sense have a stronger sense, you can correct me if I'm wrong, of black and white. They don't see gray too well. Right and wrong, they're a little more rigid about it. But using this context, my idea was to take a character to show up the city. That's principally what the third squad does. But to get into the mind of such a person, to see how this person would respond or behave, I had to, in fact, do first person and third person, because it was not enough for me to just take third person and convey the kind of character. It's not something that we are normally used to. It's very hard for us to try and imagine somebody behaving like that principal character, unless the person is in some sense expressing it himself. So I had to do that, and I'm just giving you one example of it.
Thank you. That's very fascinating. Zach, you talked about how a city is so culturally contextual. So how does this then influence how you build the characters, particularly the criminal characters in your book?
See, as a writer, I don't actually believe completely in this sort of white and black characters, but I prefer, gray sort of characters, if you can call it like that, with a mixture of both. Once some scientist told me that there is no such thing as a man or a woman, but we are maybe 80% man, and then even a man will have 20% whatever woman in, and a woman will have a certain percentage of man. And so it's all a question of percentage. So I think same comes with this thing, whether you're good or bad. So you're not nobody's 100% good or nobody's 100% bad, but you'll be all on some scale in between. I find it more interesting to read about such characters and write about such characters who are not very clearly heroes. So most of my characters are if they are the heroes, they will be slightly crooked also. Or if they are the villains, they will also have something good in them, some, human characteristics. So they're not all out evil. So that's so it's more like a kind of nuanced idea. And the thing is that I'm not indulging in criminal activities myself, but I spend a lot of... I swear.
Sorry, that was just a poor joke, possibly.
No, but it sort of interests me, why people are like that way. And so much of in my latest 3 books, much of the plot has been set in the Majestic area, which is near the railway station, bus station, the old town, and the jail used to be there also before they moved it out of town. Now it's a park. And a lot of shady bars and cheap hotels and that kind of things. So, and when I first came to Bangalore 30 years ago, I spent a lot of time in that area because I was a backpacking tourist. And even after I moved to the city and I've been living, I live in a very nice neighborhood. But I still like going to Majestic once in a while when I feel, that like, oh, my, creative juices are drying up. And so like I often go there just to walk around and get inspiration for new things to write about. And I always find something interesting. And also like over this period of time, I mean, I noticed certain changes. Like my first encounter with criminals in Majestic was this, when I was here for the first time, like 30 years ago. And I had been to Thomas Cook to change some traveler checks into rupees. And Thomas Cook was in MG Road at that time. And then I was going back to my lodge. And so I was carrying like 10,000 rupees, which was what I was going to spend over the next 1 month in my pocket. And then I was surrounded by these 7, 8 very threatening rowdy sheeters. I mean, I didn't know the word rowdy sheeter at that time. I understood it later. Like, like rowdy sheeters in Bangalore are like different from like gangsters in Chicago. They look like large old monk bottles, no, with legs underneath. So they stood in a ring around me, and I kind of sensed that this might turn ugly, and that this might be a robbery. But I had 10,000 in my pocket, so I thought I'll hand it over, because if they all jump on me, these old monks, I'd just be flattened into a chapati. So then the lead gangster, he said, "Give us 20 rupees." And my reaction was the same. I started laughing. And because 20 rupees and I had 10,000, no, I was prepared to give them 10,000. So I started laughing, and they became so confused, they were like looking at each other like, what is this, the crazy foreigner
punches up like Rajnikant or something?
Yeah. And so they were so confused. Then I started walking, and I walked off to like an area where there was more people around. And they were like, "Come back, we're trying to rob you. Come back," So like, if this had been in, let's say, Upper Manhattan, they would have just pulled a knife and taken whatever they wanted. But this was Majestic, so like it's a little different style. But then the thing is that just last year or so, I was there just like doing my inspirational walk, and I dropped into one of those stand-up bars, like where you just pour down the pint and pintu, they call it that. So on the pintu kodi, I told them, they gave me that pintu, and I had it, and then thought of walking on. And outside this bar, one man was laying on the pavement. No? Here, also a customer of the bar, so like a colleague in a way. And he was taking a nap. I mean, this was like early afternoon, so maybe he had been there since 8 in the morning. They opened much earlier there in Majestic. And yeah, they opened all around the clock, actually, some of them. So he was lying there, and then these 3 street kids were robbing him. They had taken his money and things, and his shoes, and they started pulling off his pants. So I felt like I should interfere, because if I had been there, I would have wanted somebody to interfere. So I told these boys, like, look, take his money and watch and what you want, but leave him his pants. No, what will his wife tell? If he goes home, no, without pants, his wife will think that he's been maybe drinking or some bad activity like that. And so the lead guy of these boys, and they were like 11, 12 years old boys, he pulls a knife and puts it to my throat, and like, "Uncle, fuck off," kind of something like he said. So like, also that thing, like the criminal character is it's like a very wide spectrum. Like if you compare to those old-time gentlemanly gundas to these new criminals who are like, I mean, obviously they also know that they can't be prosecuted because they're just like 10, 11, 12 years old. So like this, there is a wide spectrum. So I'm trying to kind of capture that in my writing somehow. That you have to see it for what it is. Like I mean, it's a broad picture. It's not like just like that or that, or you can't really pin it down. You know?
But really, it all comes back, I think, in modern times to what is a crime and who is a criminal. I mean, we all have our criminal statutes, we all have our laws, we all have our process. But at the end of the day, given what all is happening around us, and all of us are exposed to what is happening through the media, I think the notion of crime, and for writing crime into your narratives, there's a sea change in terms of how you want to portray the contemporary moment. And I think it's become very ordinary. It's become widespread and very ordinary. So to try and write a narrative which stands out from your day-to-day experiences is getting more and more hard.
Now, I actually have lots more questions for our panelists, and because this has been so exciting, and I don't think I'm ever going to visit a city again and not think about it a little differently. We have a little bit of time, and I would like to throw the floor open to audience questions and virtual audience questions also, if there are any. Please,
So you
yes,
can come
sir?
here and ask.
May I trouble you to come to the mic,
Yeah,
please?
yeah, yeah.
And-
Sir, here. You.
Sir?
Sir, you.
Right here.
You can ask here.
Hi, thanks a lot. With the respect to you touched, I think all of you touched on this right and wrong. And with regard, Sanjay, to what you were saying about crime, to what extent in your writing, when you're writing, are you thinking about what a crime novel has to be? It has to have suspense, it has to have mystery, there has to be some detection that takes place, versus or juxtaposed to morality. And I don't mean legal, the breaking the rules or not breaking the rules, but what's right or wrong. And in your writing, I'm curious as to how you do that, or if you do it at all.
Sanjay.
So the
Sanjay,
question is
that
for
was to
you.
I think it's a great question. And in my case, I think it varies for different writers. I don't write procedurals, and I don't write the old-fashioned detective. I don't write the old-fashioned crime of passion or crime of accident and the process of detection thereof. It's more the morality aspect that concerns me, and it concerns me very deeply at a very broad and societal level. So the third squad takes the whole idea that the police force they kill 600 people in the 90s. 600 people were killed without an FIR, without due process. And so you can look at this whole thing two ways. One is to say that, the law is an ass. It's slow, it's slumbering, and it has its problems in execution. It has its leakages. And if there is some process in which you can be a vigilante, the state becomes a vigilante and is able to kill all these people so that your children are safe and you can sleep peacefully. And the weak underbelly is safe, which is, in the case of Bombay, film industry and the property industry. This is all fine. So how does that measure up to your thinking? Because you were part of it and you were fine. Everybody was fine. Nobody's questioning that anymore. And the fourth novel, which is a political novel, how do politicians behave, and how that is, this whole hackneyed expressions of normal, new normal, as far as morality is concerned. So there is really what I'm trying to say is this, hackneyed as it sounds, there is a new normal as far as morality is concerned. That we are accepting that politicians will behave like this. Politicians will protect each other. Nothing will happen to them. It's at the end of the day, it's a power game. If you're on, and it's your time. If your stars are right, you're protected for a while. If your stars are wrong, you are exposed for a while. It's a power game. It's a political game. So in the contemporary moment, there is a serious threat to our old-fashioned ideas of crime, criminal, and so on. That's what.
And I think very interestingly, maybe a couple of decades back, there was either this criminal, the black and white, the hero and the criminal, or there was this one variation who was the Robin Hood, who would, do good for society, but, bad for some elements. But now, as Sanjay is rightly saying, the palette is so broad and there are so many shades. And somewhere we don't want to judge them without the context. There could be this whole controls aspect to it, and with the state, it's actually to birth in the Marxist thinking that the state has been so demanding and so dominating, that there is rebellion, and hence, in whatever way, crime is justified. Or the whole strain aspect, that I'm so strained with my circumstances, like those boys pointing a knife at your throat, that, you know, you're an entitled guy, you can buy a Pinto and we can't. So, you know, you have no right to tell us what is right and what is wrong. So I would love to explore these ideas rather than sit on judgment on any of the characters.
Thank you.
So we have time for just one more question. I know we've got. All right, I'm going to ask both of you to please come up and share your questions, but also then request our panelists if we could just keep the answers as short as possible. We're already a little over time.
Quickly.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
While they come, to get back to you, we also have to write a good story.
I think
We also
that's
have to
a
write a
good
good story.
Fast, fast.
Yeah, hi. My query to the panelists is, I see that the entire spectrum is there for the crime novels. I just want to, tell that it's not anymore the old, old one in a new bottle. My thing is, with the, recent developments in technology, how is the crime writing, how did the modus operandi change? Like, is there any changes which the writers are incorporating?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. May I invite one of you to take a stab at that, please?
Okay,
Zach, thank you.
new technology and all that, it has created a different kind of crime, but the problem is that it's damn boring kind of crime to write about. Somebody sitting and hacking on a computer, like, it's just like,
I might differ with that slightly. I think it's possible, perhaps.
but it'll be
As boring, and I ran a software company, so I know the bits and bytes can be very boring.
No, but I'm with Zach on this one. To a reader, it's so difficult to write hacking as a crime because you feel like you're typing. What exactly did you do? So I empathize with you on
Exactly.
that.
What
So,
happened?
Yeah.
Where was the crime?
Where's the body?
Where's the body? Body is needed.
Yeah. Thank you, Zach. Ma'am, may I invite you for your question, please? And thank you, Sanjay, also. for your opinion.
I just wanted to understand, just assume as if I'm going to write a fictional novel about crime. Do you sit down and read a crime story and say, I want to break down this crime and see what will apply to my story? Or do you also break down a criminal, a character you've read, maybe in newspaper, and break it down and say, these are some characteristics I want in my criminal in this story?
Maybe I can share the principle I use. I call it the WOE principle, WOE. Firstly, why is the crime happening? What are the outcomes? And how does it end? For the person and for the story, for the plot.
And may I add, there are a lot of manuals for how to do it, how to write crime fiction. And there are writing courses and writing programs, maybe not right now because of COVID, but like they will teach you exactly how it works. Because there are a lot of technicalities in putting it together, which is good to know to make it work.
I won't share my experience. It's very inefficient.
We're done too.
Okay. Now, I mean, clearly this is a panel that can go on for another half an hour.
We are really running short of time.
Yeah, we're totally running short of time. I apologize to anybody else who has questions, including those who've joined us through the internet through Zoom. But if you've typed out your questions, may I invite our panelists to maybe take a look at the feed and then share your answers there. Once again, everyone, please a hand for Zach, Sanjay, and Rachna. It's been an amazing time.
And also for Krishna Udashankar. Can you clap for her also, everybody?
Wonderful host.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.